All right, so today we're going deep on Bill Gates, but not Microsoft Bill Gates.
Yep.
Well, I mean, kind of, but more like Bill Gates, the, what is he now, global advocate?
Philanthropist.
Yeah, philanthropist, exactly.
Yeah.
We've got an interview with Walter Isaacson, so that's really cool. And also a sneak peek at his new book, The Sustainable Future.
It really is incredible, the journey he's been on. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, from like literally changing how we use computers to like saving lives, you know, around the world.
Yeah. And what's so interesting to me is, well, I was reading his memoir, Source Code, and he actually talks about how, you know, as a kid, he had these like personality quirks. And now looking back, he thinks he might have been on the autism spectrum.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the thing is, he doesn't see it as a negative thing at all. He talks about how that laser focus, you know, that sometimes made him awkward socially, that same focus was like the key to his success in tech.
Yeah. It's like that story about him and Paul Allen,
Yeah.
you know, sneaking into the computer labs at night, like classic teenage rebellion, but also that drive, that obsession. You can see where it comes from now.
And it's interesting because in the book, he's honest about how, you know, that kind of intensity, it didn't always make him the best manager, especially when he was first starting out at Microsoft. Like, he could relate to the hardcore engineers beyond that.
Well, sure. Yeah, I get that. It's almost like a cliche, though, isn't it? Like, oh, I'm so brilliant, I don't need people skills. I mean, that's kind of dangerous. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think to Gates's credit, he realized that. He talks about how he learned over time that you can't just surround yourself with people exactly like you. You need different perspectives, different strengths, and you have to actually like care about people, empathy, diplomacy, all that stuff.
It's a long way from the world of code, right? Right.
Yeah.
Learning to navigate all those human complexities. But I'm curious how that plays into his work now, you know, with the foundation.
Yeah.
Especially with all his, his criticism of like U.S. foreign aid cuts. He's been pretty outspoken about that.
Yeah, he's really taken aim at the cuts to PEPFAR, the AIDS relief program, and also USAID, which is more broad development aid. And those cuts, they have a real impact. PEPFAR alone, it saved millions of lives in Africa.
It's tough, though, because a lot of people, they hear foreign aid and they just think, oh, that's money going out the door. We should be spending it here.
Right. And it's less than 1% of the U.S. budget, to be clear. But Gates argues it's not just about the money. It's about, well, he says it's about America's role in the world. Like, are we going to help or are we going to retreat? But he also says, you know, aid has to be effective. It can't just be throwing money at problems.
And he's called out some pretty powerful people on that, like Elon Musk with those USAID cuts. And even, I mean, he had dinner with Trump and they, like, argued about foreign aid.
Yeah.
He's not afraid to make enemies, I guess.
I think it's more that he sees these issues as too important to stay silent. You know, he's willing to take the heat if it means speaking up for what he believes in.
Absolutely. And, you know, speaking of things that people have strong opinions about, let's move on to AI. Because Gates, he's definitely excited about it, but he's also, like, cautious.
Yeah, it's like this double-edged sword for him. On one hand, AI could revolutionize healthcare, you know, make education more personalized, solve some of these massive problems. But on the other hand, there's the potential for things to go wrong, and go wrong in a big way.
And that's what we're going to dig into in part 2, his anxieties about AI. Because it's not just hype, he's got some real concerns.
So we all know Gates is, like, pumped about what AI can do. But reading these sources, what really struck you about where his optimism ends?
Honestly. The stuff about deepfakes, like, it just, I don't know, really creeped me out. He says, and it makes sense, right? Deepfakes could get so good we can't tell what's real anymore, what's news, what's someone actually saying.
And the impact, you know, on elections, on just, like, trusting anything you see.
It's terrifying. And it's not even just that, right? He's also worried about, like, algorithms taking on our biases, like with hiring or getting a loan. What if they just make things worse?
Exactly. And that's a huge concern. You've got these systems making decisions that impact people's lives. Yeah. And if they're built on data that's biased, even if it's unintentional, it just reinforces those inequalities.
So what's the solution? I mean, Gates talks about this human AI compact, right?
Yeah.
What's that all about?
So basically, he's saying we need ground rules. Like, before we go too far down this road, we need to agree on some, like, ethical principles for AI.
Okay, so not banning AI altogether, but more like shaping it, making sure it reflects, you know, human values.
Exactly, because the potential benefits, they're huge EE.
Yeah.
I mean, Gates talks about AI transforming healthcare. Imagine, like, diagnostic tools that can catch diseases super early.
It'd be life-changing, especially in places where, you know, access to good doctors is limited.
Right. But there's the flip side too. What about jobs? What happens when AI can do like half the jobs that people do now?
He talks about that too, right? And he's not, like, ignoring the problem.
No, he acknowledges it head on. But he also thinks with the right planning, we can adapt, like invest in retraining, help people learn new skills.
So it's not just about the tech itself. It's about preparing for the impact, which is actually like what the Gates Foundation does, right? They're using AI for things like fighting poverty and hunger.
Yeah, they're funding projects that use AI to like help farmers grow more food,
Right.
track diseases, even personalize education in developing countries.
So they're kind of proving his point, right? Like,
Yeah.
AI can be this force for good. But at the same time, he's super clear that it's a tool. It's not a replacement for, like, human connection.
Totally. He pushes back against that whole like AI is going to be conscious thing. He actually says AI could free us up to focus on the stuff that makes us human. Creativity, empathy, all that.
Which honestly is kind of reassuring. With all this tech around us, it's good to remember what makes us unique. Okay, so shifting gears a bit, let's talk about his new book, The Sustainable Future. It seems like it's all about, well, tackling the biggest challenges facing humanity.
Yeah, and it's interesting how he connects everything. Climate change, global health, AI. He's saying these aren't separate problems. They're all intertwined. And he leaves out some pretty concrete solutions. Like he has this decarbonization playbook.
Okay, what's that? The decarbonization, what was it, playbook?
Basically, it's a step-by-step plan to transition to clean energy. He goes deep on the tech, green hydrogen, modular nuclear reactors, even stuff like carbon removal.
So not just reducing emissions, but actually changing how we get our energy. Is that even realistic, though? I mean, with all the, political roadblocks and, like, the fossil fuel industry?
He knows it's a huge challenge, but he's still optimistic. He says we actually have most of the tech we need right now.
Yeah.
And things like renewables, they're getting cheaper all the time.
He also talks about this pandemic shield, right?
Right. That's about preventing future outbreaks. He wants a global network of like disease surveillance labs,
Yes.
places to make vaccines fast. He says COVID, showed us how unprepared we are.
It all sounds really ambitious, but Gates does have a history of, like, setting huge goals and actually achieving them. What strikes me is he's not just saying, oh, governments should do this. He's talking about individual responsibility, too.
Totally. He's saying we all have a role to play, like what we buy, who we support, even just like holding our leaders accountable.
So it's not about waiting for someone else to fix it. It's about being part of the solution. This whole conversation, it's really making me think about, what I'm doing, what more I could be doing.
Same here. It's inspiring, to see someone like Gates with all his success dedicate himself to these problems. And it just shows you we can all make a difference.
So before we wrap this whole deep dive up, let's talk about Gates as a leader. He's come a long way from that, like, hard-driving tech CEO image.
Oh, definitely. He's much more, reflective now. He's not afraid to admit his mistakes, and he talks a lot about empathy and collaboration. And you can see that in how the Gates Foundation works, but that's a whole other conversation for part 3.
Okay, so Bill Gates, the leader. It's interesting, right? Because you think of him as this tech genius, but now he's leading this, like, global philanthropy effort.
It really is. And he's brought a lot of that, that Microsoft DNA with him.
But he's also learned some things along the way. Like, he's pretty open about how he wasn't always the best manager, especially in the early
He
days.
admits that, yeah, he was so focused on like the tech, the code, that he doesn't always get the people side of things.
He says he wasn't great at motivating people,
Yeah.
especially those who weren't, like him,
Yeah.
like the engineers.
Yeah, and to be effective as a leader, he had to learn to, build consensus, value different talents.
It's like he had to learn to be more, human, less like a machine.
Exactly. And you can see that in how the Gates Foundation works. They're very data-driven, but they also understand the importance of like relationships, collaboration.
And their work on global health equity is a good example of that. They've done amazing things with, like, polio and malaria. And now they're investing in, like, new vaccines and treatments.
And it's not just about, throwing money at problems. They're working on like the root causes of poverty and disease.
And they're doing it in partnership with, local communities, not just saying, here's how to fix it from the outside.
It's about empowering people, which is, I think, a big part of Gates's philosophy now.
He's realistic, though. He knows philanthropy can't do it all.
He's a big believer in government action, too, especially on issues like, climate change.
He says governments have the resources, the scale, to make a real difference. But he also thinks they're often too short-sighted.
Yeah, he's been pretty critical of, political inaction, and he's not afraid to say it.
It's a reminder that even someone like Bill Gates, right, with all his influence, he can't do it alone.
We all have a role to play, and that's kind of like the big takeaway for me from all this. What can WE do?
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by these huge problems, but Gates is saying everyone can contribute.
It could be, the choices we make as consumers, or supporting organizations that are doing good work.
Or even just, speaking up, making our voices heard.
It's about being engaged.
So this whole deep dive on Bill Gates, it's been, I don't know, it's been pretty thought-provoking.
It's definitely made me think about the future, about what's possible, about what my role is in all of this.
I think that's a good place to leave it, right? Like, what can we do? What will WE do? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it's given you some things to think about.
And maybe even inspired you to take action.
We'll see you next time.